whole country should be profoundly grateful for the patriotism and courage of its staff. They work indefatigably every day to keep the British people safe. Since the start of 2017, MI5 and the police have disrupted 37 late-stage attack plots. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, an Islamist suicide bomber murdered 22 people and injured over 1,000, as well as inflicting incalculable psychological damage and misery. I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our profound sorrow and extending our heartfelt condolences to everyone affected by this barbaric act. They were supposed to have a brilliant time and come home safely. What should have been a simple pleasure turned into a hellish nightmare. It's vital that we understand what happened and what lessons we need to learn, because we must do everything possible to prevent a repeat of this outrage. Volume 3 of the inquiry was published last Thursday. I want to thank Sir John Saunders and his team, who have spent more than 3 years on it. Sir John finds that there was a failure by the security service to act swiftly enough, and problems with the sharing of information between the security service and counter-terrorism policing. Following the publication of the report, the Director General of MI5 and the head of counter-terrorism policing offered their profound apologies for not preventing the attack. Sir John does not blame any of the educational establishments that the bomber attended for failing to identify that he was a risk, but he does find that more needs to be done to ensure that education providers share relevant information about students. Sir John concludes that the bomber should have been subject to a prevent referral at some point in 2015 or 2016, adding that, however, it is very hard to say what would have happened if he had been approached under prevent or the Channel programme. The police investigation into the attack, Operation Manteline, is praised. Although Sir John cannot conclude whether the attack would have been prevented, he finds that there was a significant missed opportunity to take further investigative action that he judges might have led to information which could have prevented it. While this is welcome, and the Home Office will work at pace with both organisations to act on the Chairman's recommendations, we must not lose sight of the fact that responsibility for the attack lies with the bomber and his brother. So these conclusions require careful consideration, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2017, the government has made a number of changes to how we deal with and seek to prevent terrorist attacks. We have given law enforcement and intelligence agencies improved powers. We have strengthened the controls around access to explosives precursors. We've strengthened the management of terrorist and terrorist risk offenders in prison and on licence. We've ended the automatic early release of terrorist offenders in England, Wales and Scotland. And we've ensured that the sentences served by terrorists reflect the severity of their offending. And we've strengthened the tools for monitoring dangerous people in the community. We've invested heavily in counter-terrorism, unveiling a new counter-terrorism operations centre in 2021 that brings together partners from counter-terrorism policing, the intelligence agencies, the criminal justice system, and other government agencies. This will allow minute-by-minute collaboration between teams in the police and the MI5. Last year's integration of Special Branch into the National CT Policing Network will improve our response to the full range of national security threats, boost skills, and ensure better communication between agencies and a more consistent and effective national response. Work is currently underway to develop a new faith security training scheme to raise security awareness amongst faith communities and help them to mitigate threats. We continue to engage with faith organisations and security experts to develop this scheme. In April, my right honourable friend, the member for Witham, announced the continuation of the Jewish Community Protective Security Grant for 2022, In May, new funding was allocated to provide protective security at mosques and Muslim faith schools. In response to any terrorist attack affecting British nationals in the UK or overseas, the Home Office's Victims of Terrorism unit works to ensure the right support is available to them. The unit is conducting an internal review to strengthen their work. I am overseeing a comprehensive review of the contest strategy to combat terrorism. This follows on from the independent review of Prevent, led by William Shawcross, which assessed the programme's effectiveness in stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. And as the independent review made clear, Prevent requires major reform, and I've accepted all of the review's recommendations. It has underestimated the threat of Islamist extremism, which remains by far the biggest that we face. Too often, it has minimised the role of ideology in terrorism. Prevent will focus on security, not on political correctness, and its first objective will be to tackle the ideological causes of terrorism. The government has also developed a comprehensive system of support for the owners and operators of public places across the UK. This includes access to research-driven expertise through products delivered by the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office and the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure. But we must go further, Madam Deputy Speaker. Martin's Law, formerly known as the Protect Duty, will introduce proportionate new security requirements for certain public premises throughout the UK. They will be better prepared, ready to respond, and their staff will know what to do in the event of a terrorist attack. Martin's Law will clarify who is responsible for security activity at the premises in scope, increasing accountability. We are also considering how a full inspection function will oversee compliance to provide appropriate advice and, where necessary, to sanction. Martin Hett was one of those killed in Manchester. I'm enormously grateful to his mother, Figan Murray, and the Martin Laws campaign team, as well as to Survivors Against Terror and all security partners, businesses, charities, local authorities and victims group that have informed our work. I've always been humbled when I've met them and heard about their experiences. The doctrines that underpin how the emergency services respond to incidents have improved since the attack. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to close by once again recognising the anguish and courage of the loved ones of those who were killed or hurt on that dreadful night. It united the country in sorrow and in disgust. We will continue to work non-stop to prevent further such tragedies being visited upon others, and I commend this statement to the House. Thank you.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 22nd of May 2017, thousands of people, including children and their parents, went to watch a pop concert. Instead, they were faced with the most unimaginable horror, and 22 people lost their lives, including children, the youngest being just 8 years old. Hundreds more were injured. Those families have endured the unimaginable, and all our thoughts are with them today, and with the people of Manchester, who have stood and supported each other through the most difficult of times. I join the Home Secretary in thanking Sir John Saunders for this far-reaching inquiry and his vital work seeking answers for the victims and for their families. The responsibility for this vile attack lies with the bomber and his brother and those who may have radicalised and enabled them, and we condemn, all of us, their actions in the strongest possible terms. It is right that the brother has been brought to justice. But rightly too, this report has looked at why it happened, what might have prevented it, to seek the truth for families and their loved ones, and to identify changes needed for the future. And these are important and serious conclusions that are hard to hear. That there was, in Sir John's words, a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. That there was a failure swiftly to act on information. There were failures in sharing information, that the bomber should have been referred to the PREVENT programme in 2015 or 16, although Sir John says it's unclear whether that would have led to action. But these are hard conclusions to hear, especially for those who have lost loved ones. The Home Secretary has rightly said that agencies and counter-terror police work immensely hard to keep us safe every day. And Sir John also says in his report that they have disrupted 27 major Islamist extremist terror plots in recent years, in addition to 5 right and left-wing terror plots too. And that is as a result of their immense efforts night and day. And it is because they are dedicated to keeping us safe. They also recognise the importance of facing up to things going wrong. And they've expressed their profound sorrow and apologies too. So John has rightly made recommendations, and rightly everyone is seeking to take those forward, and we should support them in doing so. But I want to press the Home Secretary just on some of the details of those measures. Firstly, on Martin's Law, all of us support the work of Figan Murray and many of the Manchester survivors to introduce this. Can she tell me the timetable? Will it have second reading before the summer recess? On the closed recommendations, which clearly are important, will that entire report be shared with the Intelligence and Security Committee so they can also oversee the changes that need to be made? On the issues around prisons and also around the PREVENT programme, the bomber repeatedly visited someone who was in prison for terrorist offences, and that did not trigger a further assessment, despite some of the wider things that were known about the bomber and his family. That does raise serious concerns. Will she look again at the process for monitoring prison visits, and will she accept the recommendations made by Sir John about the changes in approach to visits to terrorist and extremist prisoners that needs to be taken, and also his recommendations for changes to the law? Sir John also concludes it's highly likely that the bombers used a video online to help make the device in 2016. It is appalling that video was not taken down. It's also very troubling that 7 years on, we don't have the online safety bill on the statute. It also, though, raises the concerns about the lack of a proper strategy on online radicalisation. So can I urge her to urgently revise the countering extremism strategy, which is now 8 years out of date, despite her having received, or her predecessors having received, recommendations from the Countering Extremism Commissioner in 2018 that it was already out of date then? Will she urgently revise it to address online radicalisation? Sir John also warns about the potential indicator of extremism being violent misogyny in this particular case, and there are patterns here affecting different kinds of extremism: Islamist extremist, far-right extremist, and incel extremist. So will she commission a review into what role violent misogyny may be playing and how far that should be understood as a potential indicator of extremism and radicalisation? Sir John also raises workforce pressures, particularly in the northwest. And given the new threats from hostile states, can she comment on what her assessment is of resources? And finally, in case the concerns were raised that the security services did not understand the threats from Libya sufficiently, and that was a wake-up call, will she recognise that shows the importance for them to continually reassess different threats and not to have any hierarchy of threats or extremism, but to pursue the evidence wherever it takes them? The Home Secretary raised the survivors, and we think of them. Many of them, however, still feel they lack the support and the help that they need, even so many years after the terrible, truly terrible things that have happened. Will she meet with survivors of terror, and will she look again as well at what further support can be provided for those who lost loved ones and those who were hurt in that terrible event?
Secretary.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her questions, which I will address in due course, and I agree entirely with her assessment that we must now all come together, the government, the security services and the emergency services, to learn the lessons of this awful tragedy and work to reduce the likelihood of future attacks. It was and it is a truly sad and terrible incident, but I want to reassure the public that our priority is to keep them safe. We must root out extremism wherever we find it and give no quarter to political correctness as we do so. We must respond quickly to all criticisms, but we must also recognise the serious work that has taken place since the attack. So, coming to some of the questions that she raised, in relation to Martin's Law, the government will publish draft legislation for scrutiny in the spring, and after that introduce a bill to the House as soon as parliamentary time allows. Its progression after that is dependent on the approval by Parliament and agreeing a date for its commencement, and there will be a lead-in time allowing for those captured to prepare. Martin's Law is one part of our extensive efforts across government, including those of the police and security services, to combat the threat of terrorism. There remains an extensive programme of guidance in place, which has been developed by security experts, counter-terrorism policing and other partners, to provide stakeholders and others responsible for public places with high quality advice. But I'm very much looking forward to moving forward with the solution and presenting the bill relating to Martin's Law. When it comes to prisons, we have published a new policy framework allowing greater scrutiny around contact between terrorist prisoners and the public. Our new approved contact scheme to be implemented this year will allow greater checks on visitors and phone contacts on those convicted of terrorist and terrorist-connected offences, regardless of the category of prison in which they are held. In relation to further prevention, there is a large amount of work that's been done since 2017 to support and improve the consistency of local authority prevent delivery and to manage the risks posed by subjects of interest. That includes additional funding and support for the highest priority areas, the publication of a prevent duty toolkit, and the development of the multi-agency centre programme. And we're working across government to mitigate the risk posed by those about whom we have concern. And lastly, she asked about support for families going through this unimaginable process, and that's why I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's announcement last week about the government's commitment to legislate as soon as possible to establish an independent public advocate to support victims through a major or following a major incident. The IPA will help victims to navigate the systems and the processes that may follow a major incident, such as the police investigations, the inquests and the inquiries. I hope it's not used ideally, but in the event of a tragedy, we will have resources, expertise and a proper structure in place to support families in this unimaginable situation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know the whole House will join me. We must move forward now with the solution to ensure that our frameworks and our processes are as robust as possible so that we never see anything like this again.
Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on behalf of the ISC, I extend our deepest sympathy to the families and individuals so dreadfully affected by this terrorist act. I welcome the publication of the third volume of the Manchester Arena Inquiry Report and express strong appreciation for the work of the inquiry team. Of course, the committee will carefully consider the report and also Sir John Saunders' request that we should monitor the implementation of the inquiry's recommendations. In the meantime, does the government acknowledge and accept that the ISC is the only committee of Parliament equipped with both the facilities and the clearances fully to undertake this type of classified scrutiny?
Well, the chairman, Sir John Saunders, did make clear that he was determined that the recommendations are monitored, and he's made arrangements with the ISC to that effect. Volume 3 Open has only just been published, and the Volume 3 Closed recommendations have not yet been shared with the government. The government will carefully consider the report's findings and recommendations in full. We will also consider any recommendation that Sir John makes about the role of the ISC and the role that it can play in conjunction in light of the Memorandum of Understanding that exists between the committee and the government, and that MOU is available on the committee's website. But yes, effectively, the ISC is a very effective and secure forum in which, as has happened in the past, delivery on the back of these inquiries can be properly scrutinised.
SNP spokesperson Mari Black.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The awful events on the 22nd of May 2017 led to the deaths of 22 innocent people and hundreds more being injured and affected for the rest of their lives. Now, of course, ultimate responsibility does lie with the bomber who detonated his homemade device in the foyer of Manchester Arena as the crowds left an Ariana Grande concert. Now, I welcome the fact that MI5 have reflected and apologised for their role in failing to prevent this heinous attack. For example, the report finds that intelligence could have led to the bomber being followed to a car where he stored his explosives. The inquiry also found that 2 pieces of information about the bomber assessed by the security service as not being terrorism related. An officer also admitted that they considered a possible national security concern on one of those pieces of information, but did not immediately discuss it with colleagues and did not write up a report on the same day. So firstly, can I ask the Home Secretary what steps she's taking to ensure that the security services improve in their communications and their information sharing, as well as guaranteeing professional standards don't fall short as they have done in this case? And secondly, the inquiry has found that the bomber probably was assisted by someone in Libya, but because of gaps in available evidence, this line of inquiry hasn't been addressed sufficiently. So can the Home Secretary also provide further information whether the investigation will continue to search for who assisted the bomber? And given how much frustration the victims' families are understandably experiencing from withheld information due to the national security implications, can the Home Secretary at least provide reassurance to those families that the UK Government will leave no stone unturned when it comes to getting justice for their relatives?
Here.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and following the attacks in 2017, MI5 and counter-terrorism policing together carried out a series of reviews. Their 126 recommendations included better data exploitation, wider sharing of intelligence, and changes to how terrorist threats were assessed and investigated. An independent review by David Anderson concluded in December 2017 concluded at that point that the recommendations taken as a whole will strengthen MI5 and the police in their ability to stop most terrorist attacks. So there has been a wide range of measures and actions that have been taken since 2017 to improve data sharing and data exploitation and assessment of intelligence. But let me give her and the British people this assurance: there is no stone that will be left untouched before by this government to keep the British people safe. That's why we have announced an investment of £370 million into a new counter-terrorism operations centre, CTOC. That is a new headquarters for London-based counter-terrorism policing, intelligence community and government partners, and it will increase strength, resilience and collaboration of our wholesale UK counter-terrorism effort.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for this statement today. With 22 people murdered and over 1,000 people injured, the impact of this on families will go on for a lifetime. However, not only must we learn lessons, but we must make sure it never happens again. I welcome the government backing for Martin's Law. This is really important because people want to know that when they go into a venue, they are safe. Whilst we're waiting for this to come forward, and I hope it can be brought forward quickly, would my honourable friend tell me what conversations she's having and instructions she's giving to venues to make sure that they start to act now and not to wait until the legislation is put in place?
Well, she's absolutely right to mention and refer to the steps that we are taking, and that's why we are going to introduce Martin's Law that will impose legal duties on public venues and those responsible for public spaces to secure them against potential terrorist threats. We are already taking considerable action to ensure that there is advice, best practice and support for those responsible for public places, with high quality advice being provided to them. Many businesses and organisations already do excellent work to improve their security and preparedness, but legislative requirements will just go that step further in ensuring that there's a robust approach and that everyone knows what their duties are.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Speaker for allowing me to speak as a constituency MP from the Backbenchers today. The Manchester Arena attack led to the devastating loss of 22 innocent lives, including Alison Howe and Lisa Lees, who were killed as they waited for their 15-year-old daughters from the concert. I want to place on record my heartfelt sorrow to the family and also reflect on their courage and dignity over the last nearly 6 years during the course of this investigation and report. Can I ask the Home Secretary, from her perspective, and given now how long victims have been waiting to see this report and the outcome, the cruel findings of that report have to be acknowledged, and she's done some of that, but can she go further and put on record what will be done for the victims to finally put right the wrongs that have been identified in the report?
Well, may I associate myself with the comments that the Honourable Gentleman has so powerfully made about his constituents. The report doesn't pull its punches, and Sir John is unequivocal in his assessment of what happened, what should have happened, could have happened, and what may have resulted as a consequence. That is why the Director General of MI5 and the lead at counter-terrorism policing didn't shy away from their words that they expressed last week. It's absolutely right that we support the families going forward. I want them to know that I have full confidence in the process that Sir John has just run. I think it's been extensive. It's taken a long time. Some of the hearings had to be carried out during COVID with additional burden. The process was exhaustive and robust at all times. I think we've got here an authoritative conclusion and assessment of what happened, and importantly, lessons that we can all learn and take forward so it doesn't happen again.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary is to be commended for her statement today and for her refocusing of prevent on Islamist fundamentalism. That tyranny is the greatest threat to us. But will she take account of the recommendations of this inquiry in two particular respects? The first, the relationship between counter-terrorism police and the intelligence services. She's spoken about collaboration a moment ago. And secondly, as the Shadow Home Secretary said, the continuing observation of those who are formally subjects of interest, but then move to less stringent surveillance. That does seem to me to be a critical element in this inquiry.
Well, as Sir John said in his report, no one should underestimate the very difficult job that the security service and counter-terrorism policing do. And that job has become more difficult with the emergence of lone actor terrorists whose activities are more difficult to track. And that's why the government, including MI5, is committed to doing everything in its power to strengthen our defences against terrorism. And that's why Prevent remains a vital tool for early intervention. Without a Prevent referral being made, it is impossible for authorities to intervene to support those susceptible to radicalisation. It is an important, I dare say, an essential tool in minimising and eliminating the threat posed by terrorism, and it's vital that we now carry out the reforms made by William Shawcross and improve it so that we stamp out this insidious behaviour.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm also grateful for your special dispensation to speak from the backbenchers on this matter. The arena bomb is one of the most distressing and difficult episodes in the history of Greater Manchester, I think because so many children have been affected with life-changing injuries, having been at a music venue. In the case of one of my constituents, she has been left without her hearing, possibly for the rest of her life. And my constituents have never wanted this inquiry to be about blame, but about being able to say that we will learn lessons, that the response the country makes in future will be better and stronger as a result of that. And if I could just raise two specific matters. The report does highlight the lack of the update to the counter-extremism strategy. Now, the Home Secretary mentioned many things, I think, which form the strands of that, but fundamentally what I want to know is if somebody who has links to a country like Libya is visiting a known terror offender in prison, that will be more closely monitored in future than it was in the past. And secondly, from the point of view of the survivors and the victims' families, who I think have shown great courage throughout this very difficult process, and I'd like to specifically pay tribute to things like the Manchester Survivors Choir, which has been a huge source of support to some of my constituents. Can the Home Secretary confirm how they will be supported going forward now the inquiry itself has finished?
Well, he asked about the changes to the counter-terrorism system, and in particular the refresh of our world-leading counter-terrorism strategy contest. That is being updated to protect the public from new and emerging threats to our way of life. And as I said, we expect to publish the updated version of contest later this year. We want to ensure that contest achieves its aim of reducing the risk to the UK from terrorism, so that people can go about their lives freely and with confidence. It's based on prevent, pursue, protect and prepare. And we need to ensure that it is fit for purpose so that the public are kept safe from terrorism. In terms of support for the families, there is they have been heroic, frankly, in the ordeal that they have been through in voicing their concerns and their evidence and dealing with the tragedy of this horrendous incident. They have been very powerful. Their evidence has informed the recommendations and the conclusions, which will inform the practice of MI5 and all of our security agencies. For that, I'm grateful.
James Daly.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Olivia Campbell-Hardy was 15 years of age when she went out she's from Bury, she went out that evening and didn't come back, and she was a beautiful, wonderful person. Today we have the third volume of the report where it says there was a significant missed opportunity to take action on part of MI5. We also have highlighted previously shocking failures of the venue's owners, the security contractors and the emergency services. Some of these people could still be alive today, not all of them. And I would like to know about accountability. Too often in this place, an apology from an organisation seems to be enough. Well, it's not. People died as a result of the actions not only of this bomber, but of the gross negligence of some of the bodies that I've been talking about. Who has been held accountable? Who is going to be responsible? And will this information be passed on to the families?
Well, as the inquiry's report makes clear, the responsibility for the events of the 22nd of May 2017 lie with the bomber and his brother. Responsibility rests with them. When it comes to whether lives could have been saved, the government is, of course, incredibly sorry. And sorry is a weak word, I understand that, for the people directly affected. Our thoughts remain with them. But Sir John Saunders is also clear that in his conclusion, it remains quite impossible to say whether any different or additional action taken by the authorities could have prevented the attack. It might have done, it might not have done. It's very hard to say what would have happened if the bomber had been approached under Prevent or the Channel programme. It is difficult to make those clear direct causal connections. However, as I've said before, he doesn't shy away from saying that there was a significant oversight and there were failings in the process. There are no words that will provide solace to the families affected, but I hope that they can gain confidence by knowing that there is a huge amount of seriousness being attached to this report, and we are doing everything in our power to make sure that the lessons learnt will be applied in the real world.
Jones.
the thoughts there with the families of the victims. And can I thank Sir John for his report. The Home Secretary will be aware that in 2018 the ISC, which I sit on, did a report into the Manchester bomb and the other terrorist attacks that took place in 2017. Many of the conclusions are actually mirrored in Sir John's report, one including the issue around the purchase of precursor chemicals. 5 years on, still nothing has been done about that. The Home Secretary said to the chair of the ISC that she respects the work of the committee, and it is important that, because we are the only committee that can look at that closed report and closed evidence, that those recommendations, if we make recommendations, are acted upon. To date, though, I've got to say the government's response to the work of the ISC is not good. We're still waiting. Last July we produced our right-wing terrorism report. The MOU says they have 60 days to reply to it. We're still waiting for a reply to that. And can I just say to this, the actions of her department in terms of our scrutiny of the National Security Bill was far from helpful.
Well, in terms of chemical precursors about which he asked, we've enhanced our capabilities to detect terrorist activity involving chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear and explosives materials and their precursors, and to control and safeguard those materials. And since 2017, amongst other things, we've strengthened the controls around access to explosive precursors. We regulated sulfuric acid, for example, in 2018, and in 2023 we have laid secondary legislation which will improve how suspicious activity reports are made. So there is a lot of work that we've done in relation to that issue, but of course we can always go further.
Mark Pritchard.
The UK has some of the best intelligence agencies in the world and have many successes every day. Many of the successes, as the Home Secretary will know, cannot be made public. But they also make mistakes. They admit it themselves, as in this case, and indeed in other cases as well. So more widely, but not linked to this specific inquiry at this point, is it not time for the Justice and Security Act 2013 and the Memorandum of Understanding, which allows the Intelligence and Security Committee to do its work, should be updated in order that there can be full, comprehensive and up-to-date scrutiny of our intelligence agencies, which have huge budgets, huge powers and huge personnel?
Well, we do have a very high level of scrutiny over our agencies, whether it's the Intelligence and Security Committee, whether it is the independent reviewer, and there have been, in relation to the Manchester Arena attack, several reports, hundreds of recommendations, many of which have already been implemented by the agency. So there is a high level of scrutiny. We need to balance that with the need not to tie the hands of our agents as well, because they do very important, very vital work, and we don't want to start chilling the effect of their work.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Manchester Arena bombing was an utterly despicable attack on innocent children and adults, and our sympathies go to all those families who were affected. Madam Deputy Speaker, Sir John Saunders' report recognised failings in information sharing. The fact that Salman Abedi was a person of interest would not have been known to many of those who were perhaps best placed to spot his radicalisation, and they were unaware of the risk he presented, including at the mosque where he worshipped. So the Home Secretary mentioned in her statement a new faith security training scheme. Could she expand a little bit more on how that scheme might appropriately equip religious institutions and community groups to assist the authorities in identifying potentially radicalised individuals so they can help thwart future attacks?
Well, there are lots of measures that we have implemented and are continuing to roll out to ensure that those who may pose a risk receive some kind of intervention. The Act Early campaign, for example, seeks to raise awareness of the signs of radicalisation and where to go if you need support about someone you know. We've had several reports about educational the Shawcross report looked into educational establishments and how they can more effectively support the work of counter-terrorism. There is a multi-agency job of work here to do, and everyone needs to be clear about their responsibilities to ensure that we prevent and minimise the risk.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I thank the Home Secretary for a statement, and of course all our thoughts are with the victims, their families and the survivors as well. Prevent's original principles were about rooting out extremism and stopping people turning into terrorists. As the Shawcost Review found that a number of the projects drifted away from that. Does my right honourable friend not agree that what has happened not only underlines the need for a successful and effective Prevent programme that deals with the people most at risk of becoming terrorists, whatever their motivation?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, whether we're talking about Islamist extremism or far-right extremism. The review is clear, the Shawcross review is clear, that we need a more transparent, efficient and sustainable programme. We need more independent oversight. We need to build an extensive programme of communications and community engagement. We need new risk assessment tools, and we need to ensure that there is a consistent approach applied to all of these risks so that we can be effective in minimising the threat.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Elaine McIver was a serving police officer for Cheshire Police who went along to a concert, like 22 were people, the youngest victim being 8. I had a very close family member that worked in the immediate aftermath of that terrorist atrocity. What I'm seeking from the Home Secretary today and all those across the House is reassurance that those recommendations of the Sir John report will be implemented in full. No ifs and no buts.
Well, we want to ensure that all of the recommendations of Sir John's reports are fully reflected upon and make a difference. That's what I'm focused on, that we learn the lessons from this tragic incident and we improve our operational responses and our manner of dealing with the risks. We want to make sure also that victims of terrorism receive the support that they deserve, and that's why the Victims of Terrorism Unit is conducting an internal review to see how we can improve the package of support available to victims in this terrible situation.
Emma Lilbutt.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Liam Curry and Chloe Rutherford from South Shields were murdered in the Manchester Arena attack. The Home Secretary will have seen their brave parents in reports outside of court last week. She will also know that archaic law in relation to terror attacks is denying them the chance to register their precious children's deaths. After being told repeatedly there was a willingness from government to try and change this law, they very recently attended another meeting with ministers, where this time they were treated with contempt, they were patronised and they were insulted. It then became clear they have been misled by the government for nearly a year, because despite it being entirely possible to change this law, the government, and in particular her department, simply do not want to. This is adding to their anguish and pain. Will she please reconsider and meet with them?
Well, of course, I deeply feel for and sympathise with the families who have been so tragically bereaved by the Manchester Arena attack, and any family bereaved in unexpected and tragic circumstances deserve our full support and condolences. There is no legal flexibility on this requirement, as the death would not otherwise be registered in accordance with the legislation. So I know that this is a disappointing situation. This is not an issue that the Ministry of Justice alone can resolve, and the Home Office Minister, Lord Murray of Blidworth, explained to the Manchester Arena families that long-term change would interfere with the coherence of the General Register Officer's registration process. I know that's disappointing, but always willing to consider new approaches.
Dame Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, this report details opportunities tragically missed by MI5, but also reminds us of the need for us all to be vigilant. We know that a member of the public who saw the perpetrator and thought he looked suspicious raised his concerns with a member of the show sex security staff. but no effective action was taken. So whilst welcoming the government's approach to Martin's Law, can I ask the Secretary of State what more the government is proposing to do to ensure that security staff in both public and private sector have proper training and well-rehearsed procedures of how to respond in similar circumstances to help to prevent future such tragedies?
Well, I thank her for raising the proposed Martin's Law. The details have been generally set out. Premises that will be within the scope will be those which are defined, an event or a premises within a defined boundary. There needs to be a qualifying activity at the location, and the maximum occupancy of the premises needs to meet a specific threshold, either 100 plus or 800 plus. There will be, this potentially will cover a lot of public spaces, and it will be a real step change in how we ensure that there is more protection for users of public spaces.
Thank
you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, after the horrific, tragic, cowardly Manchester Arena bombing, survivors and the victims' families have indeed shown immense strength and courage throughout the whole inquiry process. However, the victims and survivors of previous disasters, including the Hillsborough tragedy, have had to wait years and years for governments to act upon the recommendations of reports and issue a full response. So can the Home Secretary commit today to ensure that the Manchester families do not have to suffer a similar delay?
Well, we are working at, as I said, already there has been a huge amount of change, reform and improvement within the agencies as a response of the event in 2017. This report marks another step forward. We will consider everything and we will move forward accordingly. But we will also be responding to both Bishop James Jones's report on the experiences of the Hillsborough families and the report of the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel, which will consider the full duty of candour and that recommendation fully.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for the compassion and the tone of the Secretary of State's response. I think we all deeply appreciate it and thank the Secretary of State for that. On behalf of my party, the Democratic Unionist Party, I wish also to record, Madam Deputy Speaker, our thoughts and prayers with all those who lost loved ones and who today grieve greatly. Will the Secretary of State accept that the parents of those children slaughtered and maimed are not looking for apologies, but instead are looking for improvements to ensure that no parent goes through the devastation that they have felt and still feel? And for those parents and those families, what further changes will stem from the finalisation of this report? Thank you so much.
Well, he puts it very well, and just as a sample, really, even before this report was published, since 2017, MI5 and other partners conducted a series of reviews subject to robust external oversight, and the Intelligence Security Committee published a report. There were hundreds of recommendations. Many of them have been implemented already to improve the counterterrorism operations, to improve intelligence sharing, to build a better response going beyond traditional security agencies, to connect expertise in all different kinds of public sector authorities. So there has been a lot of work which has been delivered, and we want to build on that.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement, and before we come to the next statement, I would like to point out that British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings are available to watch on parliamentlive.tv. Statement, Minister for Children.